this point, I want to introduce our next speaker, John Davis. He gave this talk last year, and it was really well received. No pressure. He's at Georgetown, and he's going to talk about leadership, pearls, and pitfalls. So please welcome Dr. Davis.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I want to hear a good morning. We did yoga pose this morning, right? So I'll try it again. Good morning, everyone. Excellent. That's the energy I like to hear at 8 a.m. in Vegas. So as mentioned, I'm John Davis. I'm the academic chair of emergency medicine at Georgetown University in D.C. I also have another role. I'm a former program director. Some like to say recovering program director, but it was a great couple of years. My other role currently is overseeing our GME platform at our university. So we have 97 training programs, close to 1,200 residents and fellows in our system. And I can tell you every step along the way, when I was an associate program director, when I was a PD, in the new role that I've taken on over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been lessons that I've learned every step along the way. And I can tell you there's a lot of mistakes that I've made along the way. And what I really hope to do over the next 40 minutes is really distill down some of those key learnings, at least from my own personal trajectory, that will hopefully help you in the year ahead as a chief resident. And as Andra kicked us off, it's an incredibly important role and really is the lifeblood of our training programs. So what we're really going to talk about today is emotional intelligence. So by show of hands, who here has ever heard of EI or EQ before? So many folks. And this is a great thing, because I can tell you in speaking on this topic 5, 7 years ago, no one had ever heard of EQ. And I can tell you it's one of those foundational skill sets that's so critical to the year ahead, to being a chief resident, to dealing with conflict, to dealing with the life of your workforce, which is scheduling, a huge part of the role, and many of the issues, the opportunities, the challenges that come around. So here's our roadmap. This is how we're really going to hit on these goals and objectives. And what I really want to focus on here, at the end of this presentation, I want everyone here to focus on being the boss that you would want to have. And so think about that for a moment, and we're going to talk about that further. So we're going to define EI, EQ, identify strategies to refine your leadership repertoire, and then describe some of these common pitfalls along the way. And here's the roadmap. Why is this so important? We're going to talk about emotional intelligence for the emergency physician, and then we're going to talk about ED leadership, pearls and pitfalls, and finally we'll round it out with some conclusions. Now, I think it's at least important to mention that unlike many of the talks that you see here at SAEM or you see at ACEP or AAM or CORD, there's a lot of evidence basis, and that's what we all look for in talks that we listen to. We like to see the articles published in Annals or New England Journal or whatever the great journals are, randomized controlled trials. I can tell you on the topic of EQ, there's not much, right? It's really a softer subject, but there is a whole world of literature out there. It's just not in medicine, and it's not in emergency medicine. It's in the business world. So different organizations, Harvard Business Review, again, I have no disclosures whatsoever, other than being a ravenous consumer. There's a lot of information that's out there, and I hope to kind of open up some of those pathways portals and let you know about some of the great resources that are out there to learn more. So yeah, I know. We're here, it's 8:20 in the morning, we're in Vegas. Why are we talking about this topic? Now, I show this picture strategically because I can tell you the one on the right is a stock photo, legally pulled from Wikipedia. The one on the left is my now 13-year-old daughter. This is when she was a preemie, an X32-week preemie in the NICU. I can tell you I snapped this photo. It just so happened that she yawned. But 13 years later, this is the look I get all the time. Happens constantly. We're going to tie that thread in there a little bit. So the real question for us is, why are we here? Leadership is all around us. We've been exposed to leaders our entire lives, whether it's in preschool, whether it's coaches or scout leaders, whether it is our managers in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about your time in medicine. If you've ever had a summer job or a research stint, All of these folks are our leaders. But of course, in our world, it's also deans, chairs, and hospital administrators. I think the important frame shift is to realize that everyone sitting in this room is a leader. And this is not by virtue of your upcoming role as a chief. You are a leader because you are a physician, a clinician, who's taking care of patients day in and day out in the ED. And in your clinical role, everyone on the team is looking to you as the leader. The optics of that and the number of eyes that are watching and shadowing and following every move increases exponentially when all of a sudden you have a title like chief attached to your name. So this is why we're here. So I always like to start off with a non-scientific poll. Now, statistics show and studies have shown us that 83% of stats are made up on the spot. So let's see if we can make up our own statistic here. And I want everyone to participate just as you did in the yoga pose. By the way, my back is still sore from that 30 seconds. Everyone participate. By show of hands, who here has ever worked with a leader at any point in your life who just doesn't seem to get it? So it's nearly always the same response, 100%. What's always disconcerting to me is when my team members are sitting at that round table in the back and their hands just come up really high as well, right? So we've all worked with leaders that just don't seem to get it. So I want everyone to take 2 minutes. There's going to be 2 minutes on the clock. Introduce yourself to colleagues at the table, and we're going to answer 2 questions. First and foremost, what are the key characteristics of the leaders that you've been exposed to who don't seem to get it? What is it? If you can distill it down, what are those characteristics that make the leader someone that you really don't want to follow, that you're really just annoyed with their presence in a leadership capacity? And contrast that with the 1 or 2 key characteristics of leaders that really seem to get it. Look at a teacher, look at a coach, look at someone that you've been exposed to who really seems to get leadership. So we'll put 2 minutes on the clock, and then we're going to ask for a couple of quick report outs, but talk amongst yourselves, focusing on leaders that don't seem to get it and those who do, the key characteristics. Starting now. Perfect, perfect. All right, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. All right, let's bring it back together. So we have 2 folks with mics here. Does anyone want to share? Characteristic of a poor leader. Show of hands. Anyone want to share? Right up here in front, table 7.
Totally just signaling. Bad leader doesn't listen.
Closer to your face to talk.
All right. Bad leader doesn't listen. Blames others for their mistakes.
Excellent, excellent. So poor listening skills, blames others, not taking responsibility. What about characteristics of good leaders? Anyone want to share what they came up with at their table? Characteristic of a great leader, someone that you've worked with that just seems to get it, pulls the team together? Anyone right over here? All right.
Like being selfless, basically, we talked about.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So great characteristics of a winning leader, right? Someone that people want to follow. So this all brings us to emotional intelligence, right? Because I can tell you when you look at the literature from the business realm,
one of the key characteristics that differentiates the great leaders from the rest of the pack is EQ. So what is EQ? A marginal factor that can have tremendous impact. Now, I want to just kind of display the power of marginal factors. I'm a big football fan. I'm unfortunately a very frustrated Washington Redskins fan. One of my colleagues, there we go, Redskins. One of my colleagues is the sideline doc, and was at the time, you know, for about a decade, the sideline doc of the Skins. And the Skins have not been doing well for like 20 years, at least, maybe 25, 30 years now. And I'd always ask John, I'd say, John, like, what is it about the Skins? Like, you know, they bring in all this great talent. You know, clearly they're an NFL team. They're stacked with talent. Why can't they win games? And he's like, you know, I've been observing football for a long time, and this was at the time the chair of one of our clinical departments. I've been observing leaders for a long time, and it's usually just like these marginal factors that make a big difference. And for instance, in football, it's usually one or two key plays that the good teams that are at the top of the pack and make it to the playoffs and make it deep in the playoffs, they always find a way to make that key conversion, that key play at the right time. That's that marginal factor that allows them to win. So a marginal factor, EQ, can assist in ensuring future success. Who here has ever met someone or been exposed to somebody at one level? They were fantastic, but when they took the next step to being a leader, they really didn't fare well in that job. Again, getting back to sports, talking about the Washington Redskins. Robert Griffin III, number 2 round draft pick, didn't fare well. 199th draft pick in another year, I think it was the year 2000, was Tom Brady. 199th. Really hard to predict future success. Again, from the business realm, EQ is one of these marginal factors that can help predict future success. So what is the difference between IQ and EQ? A very frequent question that comes up. IQ, an innate set point, can be maximized, not as readily extended. I can tell you flat out, there is no way I will ever be as bright nor as creative as any of the folks that you see listed there on the left. Fortunately for all of us, EQ can be groomed, adapted, and refined over time. And the real way to modify your emotional intelligence is by accepting feedback and being receptive to that feedback. We'll talk about the importance of that. So this is sort of the framework of what emotional intelligence is. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and where it's really important in your role as a chief resident is managing the relationships of your team members. Positive influence, coaching, mentoring, managing conflicts, teamwork, and finally, inspiring others to do a better job. And that's the ultimate goal. If you have an intern who's flailing, they're not doing well, and somehow you are able to inspire them to do better. 1 + 1 = many. So now let's talk about ED leadership and some pearls and pitfalls. And this is the real sort of crux of this talk, giving you tangible examples. And again, these are predicated on mistakes that I have made, mistakes that I continue to make on a regular basis. But I'm listening to feedback, and I'm trying to learn and sharpen that EQ as we move along. So I framed this as a top 10 list. I was a big fan of David Letterman back in the day. So these are the top 10 pearls and pitfalls of ED leadership, and focusing really on the emotional intelligence components. So lesson number 1, support those who you empower. Why is this important? Look at a classic example, being a chief resident, right? You're a middle manager. You answer to the program and the program director. You answer to your constituency, those who elected you, in many cases, into the position where you'll be for the coming year. But being in that position is kind of a tough place to be. So let's say an issue comes up, I don't know, like a common chief issue, scheduling. Scheduling is a big deal. When you own the schedule, you own people's lives. Keep that in mind, very powerful. So if an issue comes up, let's say you have one of your interns, they get their ED schedule for the month, and they're not pleased. Has that ever happened to anyone? Someone not pleased with their schedule? So they come to you as a chief resident. You crafted the schedule. You have been empowered by your program to do this very important task. They come to you and you say, nope, can't do it, can't make any changes. Then that same crafty intern decides, maybe I'll just go directly to the program leadership. And let me ask them the same question. And all of a sudden your program leader says, yep, we'll go ahead and change the schedule. All of a sudden, as the person that's sandwiched in the middle with a very important responsibility, you've been completely undermined. Very important lesson. Now, everyone here is wishing that their PD was at this talk as well. Unfortunately, not many of them are here. Hopefully they have this lesson, but the importance of this is remembering this yourselves. Remembering that when you tasked the PGY2 or the PGY3 who's helping out with the interview season and scheduling the pre-interview dinners, support those who you empower. When issues come up, make sure that you're standing by the decisions that they make. Now, there's one key caveat here, and I told you before that 75% of all statistics are made up on the spot. I will tell you about 90% of the time, the issues that arise, issues with scheduling, logistical issues with things that are planned for the program, are issues of fact. They are basically interpretation, there's a gray zone, it's hard to say, I can see both sides. Very rarely, 10% of the time or so, it's actually an issue of law. And what I mean by issue of law is that if you have crafted a schedule and it didn't abide by your program policies and procedures, as a leader, you have to overturn that, right? Because you have policies and procedures for a reason. And that's a legitimate reason. You just need to explain that to someone why you're doing it before you actually go to the intern and say, as a program director, I need to overturn this just because these are our policies and procedures. You're absolutely correct. Keep that in mind. But those are the rare exception. By and large, 90+% of the time, it's really issues of fact. And when it's an issue of fact involving someone that you as a chief have empowered to do the job, make sure you stand by the decisions that they make. Now, point number 2, embracing the difficult conversation. Who here has ever taken a course on having challenging conversations? See a couple of hands that went up, but the vast majority haven't. I had never taken a course on having a difficult conversation. But I can tell you as a program leader, whether it's an APD, PD, chief resident, you have to have difficult conversations. And you have to get comfortable with difficult conversations. I think many of us are comfortable in the clinical realm having challenging conversations about why we're not going to do a certain diagnostic test, why we're not going to give a certain medication. But when it comes to leadership, it's a much more challenging conversation. And there's this whole concept of goodwill and bad faith. Because I can tell you that the worst conversation is the one that's not had at all. And I'll give you one specific anecdote. A colleague of mine from medical school, she's a pediatrician, works in the Midwest, doing pediatrics, but has always loved emergency medicine. Never had an interest in doing a Peds EM fellowship. But at her job, she was given the chance to work some shifts in the ED, kind of supporting the ED team in pediatric cases that came in. She liked the ED so much, she went back to her chair of pediatrics, and this is a true story, and said, I have a great idea. I've identified a pain point among my colleagues in the pediatric clinic. Everyone's clinic schedule is so busy and so booked. Our colleagues hate it when unscheduled visits come into the clinic. Right? It totally messes up the schedule, and parents get angry, and kids are bouncing around the waiting room because they want to be seen. She's like, I have a solution for this pain point. Why don't I, since I love urgent, unscheduled care, sort of not schedule patients in my clinic day, and I will serve as the person that will see all the unscheduled visits for the entire pediatric practice. It's a win-win. The rest of my colleagues will be happy. I'll be happy doing the things that I like doing. She went to her chair, had this conversation. Chair said, great idea, let me think about it. 3 weeks later, she gets an email. The email's from the chair to the entire department and to the hospital administration announcing a new position that had been created. And that was the director of pediatric urgent care for the clinic, who was someone else and not her. Never had the conversation with her. And in speaking with this individual, where do you think that road ended? Stayed or left? Left the organization promptly. Within weeks, had submitted her resignation, moved to another job. She's been there for years. She's happy. And in speaking with her, I said to her, I'm like, what was it about that interaction? What could that chair have done differently? And she said, you know something, John? She's like, if my chair would have just sat me down and said, that was a great idea, we're going to move forward with this. I know you're great, you do many great things, but I don't think this is the right role for you for these reasons. She's like, I would have been angry, but I would have accepted it and I wouldn't have left. But the fact that no one had the decency to have the conversation, they avoided having a conversation with me, I'm angry now. So always keep this in mind, that having a conversation, no matter how difficult, is always better than no conversation at all, because that really leads to these deep wounds, difficult to heal. Point number 3, place yourself in others' shoes often. For every email that you send, think about how others would react to this correspondence. And realize that depending on where someone is and what they're doing and how fatigued they are, and they can have very different responses. And I want to show you one specific example of this. And this is actually a real-life example, but it has nothing to do with medicine. This is entirely from my life as a dad. So I have a 13-year-old daughter, as I mentioned. We'll talk more about that. I have a 10-year-old son. So my son's in 4th grade now. When he was a 1st grader, he really wanted to do Cub Scouts. So I'm like, you know, I'm really not into Scouts. I wasn't a Scout myself. I'm kind of a Hyatt guy, not a camper. But my wife's like, you really need to do this with him. So I'm like, all right, I'll do it with Matthew. I'll be a Scout person. But surely there must be someone else that can step up and be the den leader. So, of course, these are all guys I know from the neighborhood. They're like, no, JD, you look like you'd be a great den leader to us. And I'm like, no, not my thing. I don't camp. I don't hike. I don't know how to, cook outdoors. I'm just not the right guy for this. And my wife just gave me that look, and I'm like, okay, I'll do this. So serving as the den leader, volunteer position, now in my 4th year of doing it, I've learned a lot along the way. There's other people that have joined the pack. So dens feed into a pack, larger pack, a lot of different folks, new personalities, new people coming into the mix. So I'm sitting at my kitchen table one Saturday morning. Literally, this is a couple of weeks ago. I get this email from one of the new, very passionate members of the PAC committee. And she sends me an email and says, hey, John, this month's advancement deadline was Wednesday at 8 p.m. and you still haven't contacted Peter. Were you planning to pick up this month's We Won Awards Castaway on your own? Since you would need to go out to the Scout store to do that, I'm wondering if you wanted to coordinate with Peter and Jason to purchase the whole PAC's award for this month. CCing Jason, the PAC leader, on this. Best regards, so-and-so. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I'm like, I was angry. I'm like, why do I get this type of email when I'm doing this volunteer activity? So with my wife, we were looking at this. My wife's like, my God, I can't believe she just sent you this email. So as a moment of therapy, I tried to look at how could this email have been framed in a different way that would have elicited a different response in me. My observations of this email, number 1, what is the context? You know, it just so happened that Wednesday, and this email was on a Saturday, I was working a very busy clinical stretch. Totally, not known to the individual who's writing it. There was a very complex, non-EM, but a complex personnel issue with one of our GME team members. Very busy week. And furthermore, this is a volunteer position. Trying to help out where I can. So what were the components of this email that really kind of elicited this response to me? 1, there was no opener. How you doing? How's everything going? Thanks for all that you do for the Scouts. Nothing of that nature. It gets right into the meat of the matter, which is shaming. We're just going to start off with a shaming email. Good use of questions. I think questions are always effective, but very punitive tone. Not only have you not done what you're supposed to do for your 4th graders, now you're responsible for taking care of everyone's. And I'm CCing the boss. If you want a way to really piss somebody off, just go ahead and CC the boss, right? So the rules of engagement here, right? Because conventional wisdom would say just fire back an email. One of my points, and if you remember nothing else from this talk, in your chief year and beyond, there is no single email that requires an immediate response. I'm going to repeat that again. There is no single email that requires an immediate response. Now, there are emails that contain urgent information, and in that case, don't email back. Pick up the phone and call. Honestly, if it's something that's that urgent that it needs a 2-second response, pick up the phone and call. Call the individual. Take time to absorb, reflect, and digest. So here was the message that my wife and I cobbled together. Didn't send this back, but just kept this on the back end of how we felt this email could have been framed better. First and foremost, dear JD with an opener, thank you for all that you do to contribute to the Scouts. It's a volunteer position, just trying to help out. Next, recognition of life as a busy professional. I know that you must be super busy, so wanted to check in with you regarding the advancement awards that were due this week. Realize that your residents are busy. They're not always dodging, ignoring. There's always some that do. You'll know those folks right off the bat. But by and large, people are busy. When you're doing a trauma rotation, it is hard to get to email some days. Benefit of doubt. If you have already forwarded this information, just let me know and disregard. Oftentimes, these email communications kind of get caught in the middle, and you might not realize that someone has already taken care of the issue or completed the module or handed in their test, whatever it was, it's already been done. Look for opportunities for win-wins. If you were planning on picking up the awards yourself, which is fine, we would be grateful if you'd be willing to pick up all of the awards because it would make all of our lives easier. If you're going anyway, let's get a win for the pack. We stand ready to help you succeed. That's a huge, huge part of your role as a chief, standing ready to help others succeed. Let me know the best way to proceed. As we're on a tight timeline, being very transparent, we're on a tight timeline. If you could contact us today, it would be perfect. And thank you again. We're greatly appreciative. Opener, closer, benefit of the doubt, marching through, very different feel. So it brings us to the whole issue of communication. We communicate all the time. The goal of communication, action, outcome, behavior. We're trying to get to that emerald city, if you will. Email and the vehicle that you utilize to communicate can very readily send you into the gutter. So every email that you craft, think about it. And I can tell you the number of emails that I craft now are much less. Because a lot of times I'm trying to get the right language. If I'm spending more than 10 minutes on an email, if it's that nuanced, at the end of the day, I stop drafting the email, I pick up the phone and I call. 2 to 3 minute phone conversation, a lot easier than a half hour. It's more efficient for me to do it that way, and it also gives you the voice inflections, the ability to adapt your message based on the response, whole different set of parameters. So that launches us right into point number 4, the treachery of e-communications. The intent does not equal the interpretation. The 2 dimensions on a page of emails, text messages, tweets, the power of in-person chats. Embargo before you just reply all. I can tell you my first year as a program director, man, I remember being on vacation with my family on a ski lift, and I got that email that just elicited a visceral response. I actually lost a glove on the ski lift trying to reply to a message. Don't do that to yourself if you're a skier. Self-embargo before you hit the reply. Be very cautious with CCs. It's okay to CC the boss, but do it very transparently. I'm including so-and-so for this reason. Not shaming, but I'm including the PD for this reason. I want so-and-so to be aware that this is happening. So-and-so, if you have additional thoughts or comments to add, please do so. Do it very transparently. Beware the BCC. BCC still confuses me. And I will tell you I'm a little technologically illiterate, but I understand how to use email. In BCC, I still don't understand it. So if I'm BCC'd on something and I reply, does that go to the person that's not supposed to know that I'm on the chain or not? Be very careful with BCC. What I do whenever I'm BCC'd, I start a new email chain to reply back to the people that I want to reply to, or I forward the chain along. Beware autocorrect and abbreviations. And they'll bring us back to our 13-year-old daughter. So she's very facile with texting and all these abbreviations. So my wife's at the kitchen table, true story and a true picture that I'm going to show you here. At the kitchen table, this is about a year ago when she was 12, and my wife sent an email to her boss. And my wife asked her boss, are you available to meet? She didn't get a response in a few minutes, so she clarified Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. My daughter looked at this and said, Mom, what are you doing? And my wife's boss wrote back, WTF, what? Excuse me? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Remember, intent doesn't equal interpretation. Very different thoughts and feelings about that one. So point number 5, actively managing change. Now, when I started as an APD and then later as a PD, I always thought change was an email. That to me was like you kind of announce change. But it turns out, when you look at the business literature, change is much more than an email. There's actually a multi-step process. There's business management professors that have full professorships based on studying change in organizations. And I will tell you that your residency program is an absolute microcosm of an organization. The same principles apply. So change is not an email. Change is a multi-step process. It's getting stakeholder buy-in. It's talking about the benefits, what could go wrong, institutionalizing the change in a very cautious way, and then doing a lot of monitoring afterwards to make sure it was the right change. This goes for rotations. This goes for clinical staff adjustments to your various departments and other components of the residency. Never underestimate the impact of change on an organization. I've seen many organizations. I have friends that are practicing emergency medicine, community shops, academic shops. They've instituted changes to their compensation models that have been a net benefit. Everyone's salary is going up, but still there were issues because it's change. Never underestimate. One method that I think is so helpful is the heads-up method. Right? When you're chief residents, make sure you're giving heads up. Like if there's a big change that's coming to the PGY2 class, make sure you kind of talk to the whole class or talk to individuals within that class to kind of socialize the change. Hey, we as chiefs are thinking about doing X. What are your reactions to that? What are your thoughts about it? Not just the email. The email that goes program-wide comes later after you socialize the change to make sure that you're looking at all angles. I can tell you that a change was made to our clinical staffing in our department. The initial sort of display of that change was just at a faculty meeting. Chair said, we're making this change. Clinical staffing is changing in this way. How well did that go over? Comes back to another faculty meeting after there was a major uproar. 3 months later, we all talked about it as a leadership team, the best way to do this. Came to a faculty meeting and said, here is the end point. This is where we need to get to staffing-wise. We need to go from 3 night docs to 2 night docs. Everyone here at the faculty meeting, let's spend 20 minutes talking about that. What is the best way for us to do that? All of a sudden, there were these ideas that no one on the leadership team had thought of that were so helpful in getting us from point A to point B. And furthermore, the advantage of engaging the constituency, those who are impacted by the change in the decision-making process, it's no longer just being done to them. They're part of the solution. Huge, huge difference. Change, no problem at all when done in that frame. Learning to listen. This can be tough for emergency physicians. It's tough for me. You know, I'm used to like zipping around the emergency department. You know, sure, we listen, but do we always listen? And I'm used to making quick dispos. That's how I was trained. I'm an ER doc, right? I like quick dispos. I can tell you, in your role as a chief resident, nothing is a quick dispo. Listen, thoughtful approach to every decision that you make. Never hyper-reply to those emails. Listen, gather intel, reflect, and then decide. I recall my first year as program director. There was an issue with the program graduation. Apparently, the PGY2s were supposed to plan this grand event for the PGY3s. All the PGY2s were on ICU rotations. Fast forward, we're a month out from graduation. No place has been booked. Nothing set up and ready to go. I show up at conference one day. True story. I'm looking around. I walk into conference, and I see people kind of looking at me, then looking away. Walking and pacing. Look away, walk and pace. I'm like, that's never a good thing. You walk in as a chief or a PD and people are kind of giving you that eye. So of course at the end of the conference I get like a whole swarm of PGY3s who are angry. They're angry because their graduation has been totally bungled in some way. Easiest response to that is try to fight your way out of that corner, right? You got 8 people surrounding you who are really, really pissed off. You just want to get out of that situation. Train yourself and always think, let me stop, namaste, and listen to the feedback here. And I want everyone to repeat after me. Always remember this phrase, I will get back to you shortly. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. You are now empowered with the most important phrase in leadership. Gets you out of that corner, allows you to kind of get some depth perspective, allows you to get input from other stakeholders and do get back to people. Always do what you promise, but you don't have to have a quick dispo the same way that you do when you're caring for patients in the ED. I will get back to you shortly. Incredibly powerful. Beware of the holidays. This is one of the first lessons I got from my former chairman, Mark Smith. He'd been an ED administrator for 30 plus years, and I first took over as a program director. He's like, hey, JD, one thing I gotta warn you about. He's like, beware of the holidays. I'm like, that's ominous. Like, what do you mean by that? He's like, strange things happen around the holidays. Why? It's the middle of the academic year. Kind of the luster of starting in July has worn off. The great satisfaction of completing the next stage of training, completing that PGY year is way in the distance. I can tell you in our part of the country, in Washington, D.C., tends to be very short days that are very dark, a lot of snow, a lot of cold weather. It's just not a great time of year. And sure enough, strange things do happen around the holidays. And if you look from a change management perspective, when do we institute changes? We do it on July 1st, we do it on January 1st. The point being, January 1 is not a great time to make a change. You do it if you have to. But February 1, March 1, or before the holidays on November 1st, much better time to make big changes. Always keep this in mind. It's an area of the calendar that requires a lot of additional sensitivity, so be mindful of it when making changes. Emotional triggers. We all have these, right? We have these in the ED when we're working clinically. There are certain like high-risk conditions that kind of get the visceral response like, oh, do I really need to order a D-dimer on this? Or someone coming in and requesting a certain type of medication that just, I know they're trying to game the system here and they really don't need that medication. Everyone has emotional triggers. And I can tell you from a leadership perspective and from a residency management perspective, it's when your residents come to you and say, we got a problem with this rotation, or we need to talk about our clinical hours. We're working too many clinical hours as PGY1s in the department. We're working too many shifts in a row. Whatever the issue is, always realize that these triggers are out there. And when you have that visceral response, you have that response that I had on the ski lift, don't lose your glove. Step back, reflect, we'll get back to you. It's a great way of diffusing situations, getting your leadership team together, interfacing with your program administration, getting input from your stakeholders, all of the residents that you serve, and coming up with an answer that works. And remember, the answer doesn't always have to be favorable to whoever's asking the question. But you have to have the conversation. The most important part of the equation. So being reasonable, transparent, and consistent. What does that mean? Reasonable. Communicate your rationale. People won't always like the answer, but they appreciate having the conversation. Being transparent. That means sound policies and procedures that are clear to all. Avoid favoritism at all costs. The one saying I always had in my many years of program administration, and I do this at system administration as well, 1,200 residents and fellows in the system, I say I can only do for your program if I can do it for the other 96 programs in our system. I can only do that for you as a resident or fellow if we can do that for the other 1,159 residents and fellows in the system. Very powerful. So if someone's looking to kind of adapt and change their schedule over the holidays, be like, I hear you, it's hard to work over the holidays, but if I offer this to you, I need to offer this to 29 others. And if I offer this to 29 others too, there's no one working in the department over the holidays. We're in emergency care. We all work here. Our entire hospital team is here through the holidays. Very, very powerful message and a real key in diffusing difficult situations. So no one said that life in academics was easy. I can tell you it's incredibly rewarding, but not easy. This is a picture of me circa 2001 when I just finished my residency training, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. This is an unspecified time later. The important point here is health and well-being. And I can tell you, academics can fill any volume of space given to it. Focus on your health and your well-being. Very important to foster resiliency. So what does that mean? The healthier the leader, the sturdier the oars. The sturdier the oars, the stronger the ship. Make sure that you as an individual, you as a chief team, are taking time to do the things which allow you to be rejuvenated and allow you to do your job better. Rest, exercise, and breaks. I can tell you personally, I'm a big swimmer. Was never a competitive swimmer, but I enjoy swimming. I like lap swimming. It's a bit of like mental therapy. It's good physical exercise. You know, I had a long-standing battle with my wife over the first 5 years when our kids were very young. She's like, you're really going swimming now? You know, find those things that are important to you that allow you to be more efficient in the other hours of the day. Very, very important. So rest, exercise, and breaks. Set a good example. If you don't take breaks during your shifts, start taking breaks during your shifts. That sets a very positive role modeling example for other members of the team. I can tell you, I spent about the first 10 years of my career just never ever taking breaks during a shift. Why? Because the department was busy and I needed to be there. And then when I would take a break, it'd be like a 2-minute and I would shovel down food and get like, you know, bad reflux and gastritis. It was just an awful way of being. What I do on every shift now is I say to my colleague, I am going for 20 minutes. I'll be back. Please cover me. And I want you to go as well. Let's cover each other. What I say to every resident, every student I'm working with, take a break, and if I see you back here in 5 minutes, I'm going to send you back out. Well, Dr. Davis, I'm not hungry. I'm like, I don't care if you're not hungry. Go out and take some laps. Take a walk. Go sit down. Read a book. Check your email. Just do something to rejuvenate yourself. 10-hour shift is long. Have to rejuvenate. Try to set a great example. So we're at the end of our roadmap. Why is this topic important? EQ for the EP. ED leadership, pearls and pitfalls. It's really all about being a well-balanced leader. IQ, you're all exceptionally bright and talented individuals. To get to where you are sitting in this room today. EQ, fortunately, can be groomed, refined, sharpened over time. VQ, ventilation perfusion. Resiliency, practicing what you preach. And remember that well-being is really a key to healthy leadership, and others will follow your lead. Make it a habit to kind of try to adapt the culture of your program. And it really brings us to this leadership triad. There's no place for Vogue or Gentleman's Quarterly, though. Never a good thing. And finally, back to our top 10. Support those who you empower. You expect your program leaders to do it. Make sure that you are doing that to those who you task with very important things for the residency. Embrace those difficult conversations. No one ever gave us a textbook or a course on how to have a difficult conversation. Incredibly important. Place yourself in other shoes often. When you're crafting that email, think about how someone else will react. Try to reframe, and if it's taking too much time, just call. Have the conversation by phone. The treachery of e-communications, actively managing change. Change is not an email. Change is actually a spectrum, a process. Learning to listen, very different than when we're working clinically in the ED. Management is not a series of quick dispos, very thoughtful approach, and very different than our mindset when we're seeing patients in rapid succession. Beware that holiday period. Take a step back from those emotional tags. If you feel that gut, that pit in your stomach, save the ski glove, right? Take a step back, reflect, decide how you're going to move forward. Always be reasonable, transparent, and consistent. If you can't do it for one, if you can't do it for all, you can't do it for that one. Always use that, very powerful. And finally, foster resiliency. So it really is all about being the boss that you would want to have. I thank you very much. I will point out that I have this emoji here, and after a couple of times using this emoji, some of my residents were like, yo, JD, how can we have prayer hands? And I'm like, it's really supposed to be a namaste. So a namaste moment. I'll go ahead and conclude there. Please tweet, share on email. I'm interested in your thoughts and your feedback, and I wish you the best of luck. It's really going to be a fantastic year ahead. Thank you.